So hi and welcome to MANECDOTES. Happy Father's Day. I'm Suzanne Weerts and this is our second production of MANECDOTES, but clearly it is our first time with an online show. I want to thank Elisa Cunningham, first of all, for coming in early as a host of MANECDOTES. It was at that point in time, we thought for sure that we were going to be in a stage, and obviously that didn't happen, but because we're not, we're so thrilled that people from across the country are able to be with us tonight. I want to thank Lauren Zelansky-Connor and Suzanne Green with Gathering Us for providing the Zoom production support, because whatever glitches we've had getting started, they would have been much, much worse if I had been in charge. So thank you guys so much. To everyone who bought a ticket and to those who supported FSA as guest producers and with the VIP tickets, you know who you are, and everyone else will too if they stay to watch the credits. And if you love our show and you want to watch it again or share it with friends who have missed it, we will email you our link with our gratitude for purchasing tickets. But first, let me share with you a little bit about why we are here today. We are here because of Family Service Agency. And I want to just let you know a little bit about what it is that they do. First of all, Family Service Agency's vision statement is for every individual, a safe, healthy, meaningful life. That is what we all want, but there is no question that we have all been going through a challenging time, and FSA has been rising to the challenges and the increased demand for their services. They have spent the last weeks transforming their service models across all programs to virtual and telemental health in an effort to provide uninterrupted access to mental health care. We are living the inconceivable. And what lies ahead is unimaginable, really, but Family Service Agency of Burbank remains fiercely committed to their work. And together, everyone watching us here live and those who purchased a ticket in order to watch this show later, well, we thank you because you're a part of supporting an organization that supports so many, from youth and teens and senior citizens who are struggling with this uncertainty, to people with mental health conditions, those who are in recovery, are homeless, impoverished, and victims of domestic abuse. They're all especially vulnerable. And together tonight, we have already raised over $4,500 for FSA. So I applaud you all and thank you so much for helping make this possible. Now, if you're inspired during the show, there's a link to donate more that'll show up in our chat periodically. That's always why we do things like this. And checks can also be mailed directly to FSA if you choose to do that. And I'll share that in the chat as well once we start the show. You can also read brief bios about our storytellers in the chat. So make sure that you go to the bottom of your screen where it says participants. Right next to that is a chat box, and just click on that and you can give feedback and offer positive comments to the storytellers and share the points of connection that you made. Now, to kick off the MANECDOTE show, I wanted to share my own little MANECDOTE. So my dad is a proud Navy veteran. I was born when he was 100 feet under the North Atlantic in a Polaris submarine. Today actually marks 58 years since my dad had his first day of basic training when he was just 18 years old. Now, Daddy proudly wears his Vietnam veteran hat everywhere he goes, and he beams with pride every time someone notices and thanks him for his service. But he's a quiet man, my dad. It's been a challenge over the years getting him to open up about his difficult childhood. He was never one to talk about his feelings, and sadly, to be quite honest, when I was growing up, I very rarely even bothered to try. But on a long traffic-filled ride home from San Diego on one of his recent visits to California from my childhood home in North Carolina, Dad and I got to talking about his regrets and about his hopes and his dreams, and I got him to consider what might show up on his bucket list. He said that he'd like to travel to Australia and maybe one day to Ireland. He also said that he wants to visit all 30 Major League Baseball parks. At that point in time, he'd only been to 4. Now, I couldn't get him to Ireland, but baseball, I might be able to do that. We had gone to a Dodgers game together at least one of his previous visits. And when I saw that the Angels were in town, we drove to Anaheim the very next day, but with no tickets. The box office said that they had few tickets left, and there were prices that ranged from about $10 to $300. Well, the game is my treat, said my dad. So we'll be sitting a little higher up and closer to that $10 area. But as we stood in line with my dad wearing his veteran's hat, a man came up to us and said, "Sir, were you in the military?" And my dad beamed at the recognition. Then the man handed us 2 tickets for awesome seats. And he said, "Thank you for your service." And so with beers in hand and peanut shells at our feet, my dad and I watched as Ohtani hit his first major league career home run on his very first at bat. And memories of my dad's smile that day, frankly, they are the medicine that gets me through the melancholy of this crazy pandemic. And I look forward to checking another park off of my daddy's bucket list one day. And if his military service just happens to score us some good seats, well, I won't complain. I love you, Daddy. So on this Father's Day, I salute all the fathers and sons out there and the grandpas and uncles who have served our country. I thank you for your service and for your years of commitment, your sacrifice, and for caring for people beyond just yourself. Now, when you purchased your ticket, we asked folks to share their words of wisdom from their fathers. Ro Leone from Burbank says her dad told her, "You can skimp on some things, but never skimp on shoes or meat." So our first storyteller, he says he never skimps on carbs or sugar, and that's what he says is getting him through the pandemic. Originally from Philadelphia, Barry is a regular at Story Salon where I first met him. So please welcome my favorite Nittany Lion with his tender tale of how the comfort of coffee has carried him through the stages of fatherhood. You guys, Barry Segall.
Long been a ritual in my life. I love the smell of the fresh ground beans, the sound of the whooshing of the steam through the espresso machine, the bittersweet taste, and of course, the jolt that it gives. It's my favorite time of the day. No one's awake, the house is quiet, I can read, I can write, I can gather my thoughts for the day. Well, I could up until we adopted our daughter. JJ, a precocious 2-year-old at that time of the morning, but she insisted on being a part of everything that I did, including making coffee. So I had to change my routine to include her. I learned to make coffee with my right hand as I carried her in my left arm. Together, we would pour the water into the espresso machine. Then I would hold that little strainer basket and help her as she poured the coffee into the basket. On a good day, she'd get half in the basket and half on the floor. Then together we would screw that basket onto the machine and she would look at me and say, "Now, Daddy?" I said, "Now, sweetie." And with great glee, she would push the button to start the machine. We waited impatiently as the water heated, and then that magical sound of her little 2-year-old voice imitating the espresso machine. Child and machine in a wonderful duet that would soon produce my morning fix. As I sipped my coffee this morning, I thought of all the other things that I taught JJ besides how to make coffee and how to draw cartoon animals. Things that I thought it was important for a father to teach a daughter. Things like shooting pool, playing poker, how to fill out your March Madness brackets, the intricacies of the pick and roll, all things that I knew would serve her well later in life, especially when boys became part of the picture. All things I'm quite proud to say that she became quite good at. When her daycare center put in a small pool table, none of the other kids stood a chance. And when in high school they had a Texas Hold'em fundraiser, JJ walked off with all the prizes. And when she started college, the first boys she met was in the dorm rec room shooting pool. And I also started thinking about how different her childhood was than mine. I never would have been allowed to spill coffee grounds on the counter, nor would I have been allowed near an espresso machine if there was such a thing. Too hot, I might get burned. My parents were barely out of their teens when I was born, and they were very protective and overprotective. My dad was a child of the Great Recession, Great Depression, and his concern was making sure that the family never went without. So he spent long, hard hours working, and he was rarely home to teach me things. So when JJ came into our life, I wanted her childhood to be different. So I quit my job and began working out of the house so I could be there while she grew up, and I was. But I must have taken my eye off of her for a minute or two, because when I look back, she was no longer a child. She had become a teenager, and it happened so fast that I missed it. Maybe all parents miss it. Our relationship has changed. She no longer shrieks with excitement and runs into my arms when I walk into the room. Now, earbuds firmly in place in her own electronic world, she sometimes barely notices me. She's involved with Twitter and texting and YouTube and chat box and whatever else, and I no longer play as large a part as I once did. But we do some new things together. We do some new things together. Can you hear me now? I'm trying again. JJ is now 22. JJ is now 22. I can't carry her around in one arm anymore. When she's home, she opts to sleep in. We no longer make coffee together, and she no longer sings along with the espresso machine. But we do some new things together. We have taught and taken yoga classes together. She's much more limber than I am. She teaches me tennis, but she's a tough teacher. If I hit the ball into the net too many times, she makes me do lunges around the court. And we watch movies and TV shows that just a few years ago would have been completely inappropriate. But maybe they still are, but at least now we both understand what we're watching. And of course, we go to Starbucks together. So now I have my coffee time back to myself again. The house is quiet. There's nobody to sing harmony with the espresso machine. And as I sit and write in my journal, sometimes my mind wanders and I begin to doodle, drawing Elmo and Clifford, the big red dog, and Blue's Clues, and wondering how all those years went by so fast. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you, Barry. That was lovely. So clearly, fatherhood has a lot of bumbles, much like, say, doing a Zoom production. There are always bumbles around every corner. And this is also making me really impressed with my children, and probably anybody who's got children right now who have had to do their education online over the last a few months. This is a good example of some of the challenges that I think our kids are overcoming. So a shout out to all of the professors out there and the students and everybody who's trying to navigate technology. So I applaud you all too. So dads leave lasting impressions. Jenny Mosley from Concord, California says her dad often reminded her, don't sell yourself short. Caroline Solberg's father's wisdom is pretty applicable right now. Be kind, be patient. We could all use a little bit of that, huh? And this one brought tears to my eyes when I read it. It's from Carrie Williams from Santa Ana. Her dad often said, how precious are my thoughts of you. Oh.
I'm very happy to introduce our next storyteller, Eric Connor.
When I was 11 years old, my dad turned me into a pervert. Inadvertently, I think. But before you place an Amber Alert, let me give this shocking statement some context, or at least provide his memory with plausible deniability. I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, in this house. There were not many kids in my neighborhood, except my best friend from school and another classmate. Let's call her Charlie, just in case somehow, some way she's watching this. Maybe she's telling the same story at a MANECDOTE performance somewhere. Most tales about my crushes or romances usually end the exact same way. Me sulking alone while listening to Smashing Pumpkins and Joe Jackson on repeat. But the story of Charlie is a different tale. I think she liked me. Maybe even liked me. Why else would she walk 2 blocks to see if we could hang out? Only problem, that feeling wasn't mutual. Even at that tender young age, I didn't want to lead her on, or maybe I didn't want her to tie herself to a boy with no direction in his life. So I did what any self-respecting kid would do. I told my dad to lie. Dad, I don't care how. Say I have a disease or homework or Hebrew school or a man problem. Whatever it is, do not let her in. And he abided. Once. A week later, she returned. Dad, tell her it's a rash, or our Schnauzer's sick, or it's Passover. But this time, I overheard him say, yep, he's free. Want to come back at 3 o'clock? What? He pimped me out. How can you allow her into the house? Girls and vampires live by the exact same code. They can only infect you if you invite them in. He saw it differently. Be a mensch. I'll run a movie. It'll be over in a flash. Spoiler alert, if I'm talking about this 35 years later, it was not over in a flash. Because that young woman became my wife. No, she didn't. I'm lying. I'm not even Facebook friends with her. So it's fair to say that afternoon left a mark far deeper than most flashes. My dad went to Video Frequency and rented us a movie, whose name I will not mention yet. You like Tarzan? This is like his cousin or something. Charlie came over. I could lie to you and tell you what she was wearing, what she smelled like. What I do know is that she was an 11-year-old girl who gave me the kind of hungry eyes Mike Pence has for Donald Trump. Upstairs to the lofted second floor we went. The steps never seemed so long, so far, and all the house adults were nowhere to be seen. And so we put the movie in the VCR, Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, based on a little-known Marvel comic book, starring a post-Charlie's Angels, pre-James Bond, Tanya Roberts. Its logline: a female shaman finds a young girl lost in the jungle and raises her to become a protector of a remote African village. Early in the movie, there's some death, other mayhem, no problem. Eventually, the little girl morphs into the lithesome Tanya Roberts. However, something happens to this character when she gets older. Sheena might have control over the animals, but her clothes, on the other hand, seem to disappear every 3rd scene. Apparently, my dad missed the New York Times review, which warned that this PG movie contains a, quote, good deal of nudity. What it should have said, may cause an 11-year-old boy to be even more terrified of the affections of a girl. Every time this warrior queen showed off her soldiers, my mind exploded. What if Charlie tries to ride me like Sheena did the zebra? What if she thinks this means I want her? Man, Tanya Roberts is hot. What if she tells the whole school I'm a crazed booby pervert? What if I can never look at Charlie without thinking of nudity, zebras, boobies, jungle, breasties, vagina? The end. That movie was the longest 117 minutes of my life. I'm guessing hers too. There was a brief moment of male nudity, which was actually a much needed respite. We chuckled about that the way only very uncomfortable kids put in an awkward borderline porn viewing can laugh. Charlie thanked me for the movie, and she walked herself back home. She didn't come back the next weekend. We never spoke of our Sheena trauma. She transferred schools a year later for entirely non-Sheena related reasons. I'm not sure I even told my dad what was in that movie. Come to think of it, I might have watched it a few more times. Not sure we even returned it. All these years later, I'm a dad myself of 2 young boys, including an 11-year-old. One who has never asked me to pick him up a VHS at Video Frequency. One who, I hope, still doesn't realize what's lurking on the web, which would make Sheena look like Mr. Rogers by comparison. One who's perfectly content to watch only superhero, Star Wars, and baseball movies. And if the Marvel Cinematic Universe ever expands to include Sheena, I'll take him after his bar mitzvah.
Thanks, Eric. I didn't get a chance to introduce him, but I think everybody needs to know that Eric is celebrating his birthday with us today. Not just Father's Day, but his birthday. So happy birthday, Eric. Eric went to the University of Pennsylvania for college, and he says that the reason why he chose it is so that he could find out what a fighting Quaker looked like. So that's a classic Eric moment. Now, a lot of people were telling me that cars was a big theme for their fatherly wisdom. Sharon Lawrence, who's a friend of mine from UNC Chapel Hill and also a pretty well-known actress, her dad, Tom, who was a news anchor in Raleigh when I was growing up, he told her, learn to change your own car tire. Good wisdom, Tom Lawrence. But also, Sally Chu's dad had even better wisdom, I think. When her car was making a bunch of noise, her dad, Jack Dye, said, turn up the radio. So that's good wisdom. Our next storyteller promised her husband at the beginning of the pandemic that as long as they don't run out of Jack Daniels or cheese, she can get through this. So take one more big bite from that block of Parmesan, Lisa, and digest these words of wisdom imparted by Melanie Poulis's dad in Charlotte, North Carolina. He said, a strong work ethic is one of the most important things to honor in life, and the Bible is the most valuable roadmap. I know my own daddy agrees. Now, many of you guys know I live in a house with a couple of UCLA Bruins, so I'm sure they won't be pleased that my show is heavy on USC alums, but here's another Trojan with her story, the famous Arnie Gopman, one of the funniest women I know, Lisa Gopman.
Thank you. As a college student, I often thought about the age-old wisdom, you marry someone like your father. However, I realized this would be impossible for me because there's no one quite like Arnie Gopman. Arnie Gopman knows someone who was killed by a giraffe. Let me just let that sink in real quick. You see, Arnie spent most of his teenage years working at the Kansas City Zoo. And if you catch him on a good day, that might even be the way he introduces himself. That's how he introduced himself to my in-laws. I had not even left the room for 5 minutes and I hear Arnie proclaim, you haven't been scared until you've been cornered by a 300-pound gorilla named Big Man. I've been keeping a list of Arnie's eccentricities my whole life. It's kind of hard not to when a man with so many is the man who raised you. Some of them are very noticeable. For example, Arnie cries at everything. Not just all of his children's life events, but in high school, I distinctly remember walking in on him sobbing to the TLC Unpretty video at the moment when a young woman gets plastic surgery to impress her boyfriend. Why did she have to change for him? She was perfect the way that she was, Arnie sobbed to the TV screen as me and my siblings pointed and laughed. Oh, and don't even bring up Broadway musicals around my dad. Just last week, he called me through tears, asking if I knew the Wicked song, For Good. He told me he had just gone down a YouTube rabbit hole, watching every version he could find. People could learn a lot from that song, he said. And I really hesitate to even mention his all-time favorite, The Sound of Music, because now he's likely weeping on the other side of this Zoom. Sorry, Arnie. This is just the tip of the iceberg as far as his sentimentality is concerned. He holds on to anything with any sort of a memory attached and is a borderline hoarder. I've always defended him until my husband and I recently helped him before moving out of my childhood home. Get out of there, he yelled to my husband, who looked at me with huge eyes. What am I looking at? My husband asked incredulously. My husband had apparently unearthed a top secret fridge. That's my occasions fridge. I keep all my special things from occasions there. Sure enough, the fridge was full of every frozen bar mitzvah cake, every dried prom flower, every wedding bouquet from every occasion from his entire life and the lives of all 3 children. Yep, an occasions fridge. My dad and I are so similar in that we both have these 2 sides, the sensitive side, and then our other more kind of, shall we say, loose cannon side. In Arnie's case, I've coined it Arnie's decibel level disorder. Arnie has this insane ability to go from 0 to 100 in anger over the oddest things. One extremely hot topic at the Gopman household is toilet paper usage. I shudder to think what would happen if we were quarantined together because he finds my toilet paper usage shamefully wasteful. My husband loves the story of the time Arnie had to come home from his lunch break to bring us some toilet paper because we were visiting and he'd run out. Arnie was shocked that we had gone through the toilet paper so fast. He tossed a whole package of toilet paper to me and yelled in his crazy decibel level, "This better all be gone by the time I get home from work." Another point of extreme anger, Nerds candy, strictly banned in our house. So random. But Arnie would lose his mind if he saw you eating Nerds in the house. It was a real Danny Tanner from Full House race for the vacuum cleaner kind of moment. But his absolute worst anger, Yom Kippur. As Jews, Arnie and I really loathe the day of starvation, atonement. We have a 20-year-long rule. We don't speak on Yom Kippur. Like at all. Because ever since the first year I fasted when we got in a huge fight that ended in, "Look, I'm really sorry, I'm just starving," we both learned starving and communicating is a terrible combo for us. My dad and I also share a deep love of celebrities. I'm originally from Ohio, but I learned quickly it's not always appropriate to march right up to a celebrity. Arnie, not so much. My freshman year orientation, Six from the TV show Blossom was on my tour, and Arnie could not look away. To my horror, as I went to ask where the restroom was, Arnie asked for an autograph. Arnie really likes to get the inside scoop on the entertainment world. So a few years ago, he joined the online Fox TV club, where he'd had to fill out surveys about current TV shows, and he received swag as a reward. He was really fired up about it. "Did you see New Girl this week?" he asked. "Yes, I love that show," I replied. "I thought it was a little too sexual. Don't worry, I let them know." "Great, Arnie. I'm sure they appreciate it." But my favorite moment, a few years ago, he said, "Did you know David Duchovny?" Never mind. Dad, were you about to tell me that David Duchovny was coming back to do the X-Files? "Oh, thank God. I thought they'd only told me." Good news, Arnie. That was definitely already in the news. You're okay. Another fun fact, Arnie has his own personal motto. You never know unless you ask. That's in regards to free stuff. Anytime we go anywhere, Arnie always asks, "Hey, can you throw in anything for free?" It's why one time in high school, he came home from picking up a pizza with a giant crate full of Kool-Aid. He asked, "Can you throw in anything for free?" And they were like, "Shit, we're about to throw out this Kool-Aid." We had Kool-Aid for like 10 years. It's also why my sister had 5 of her teenage birthday parties at the Marriott Courtyard indoor swimming pool. No, we didn't have a room there. My dad just made friends with the front desk guy and asked, "Hey, can we get some balloons and a cake and sneak some preteens into the side door?" To this day, I have a special fondness for a Marriott Courtyard indoor swimming pool. I mean, we used to tease my dad a lot, but a lot of this was just single parent ingenuity. It wasn't financially easy, and he had to get crafty. Some of my favorite memories involve variations of "you never know unless you ask." When I decided I wanted to go to USC, but we really couldn't afford it, my dad was determined to make it work. He spent hours on the phone with financial aid, negotiating the most financial assistance they could possibly dole out. In fact, my first day of college, the head of financial aid for all of USC insisted that my dad come to the office and introduce himself. They just had to meet the greatest negotiator they'd ever encountered. They had to meet the famous Arnie Gopman. Then my freshman year, I was insanely homesick, but Arnie wasn't able to swing getting me home for Thanksgiving or coming out for Parents' Weekend. So he got a 4th job at an airline so he could get me these shady companion tickets to fly home for the holidays and even to fly with a group of my college besties to the Bahamas for my spring break. Granted, this was a little-known third-rate airline, so what if these tickets forced us to fly standby and we got stuck in the Bahamas for 3 extra days? Thanks, Arnie. The Bahamas were amazing. Then my junior year, I just had to study abroad. Not only did Arnie give me the green light, he got my ticket to Spain upgraded to first class. I was literally the biggest baller headed abroad while at the same time being a Pell Grant recipient. Arnie's continually made my life better with his insistence on asking more for his kids. I'm lucky in that I somehow did find my husband, and of course, he's quite a character too. We actually met and fell in love shortly after I accidentally broke his ribs. Yep, he wasn't quite getting the hint that I liked him, so after a few too many Jack and Cokes and the helpful advice from a gay bestie to give him a big hug so he feels your boobs and thinks about having sex with you, I gave my man an overzealous hug and he exclaimed in pain, "Oh, my ribs." I had no idea that he had fallen the weekend before skiing and that my girls, Laverne and Shirley, actually broke his ribs. True story. Carrying on the Gopman tradition of being on a tight budget, Arnie was, guess what, our wedding planner, and single-handedly planned our amazing wedding at Madame Tussauds Wax Museum in Las Vegas. He fully supported our combination of having a rabbi and an Elvis officiate our wedding. My dad negotiated for hours with the man who ran Madame Tussauds. It got pretty intense. But in the end, we literally had the wedding of our dreams. Arnie smiled as we cut our cake with a wax Wayne Newton standing next to us. Pretty amazing moment. About 8 years ago, Arnie woke up one day and he couldn't move one of his feet. And he needed emergency back surgery. And from the surgery, he actually caught MRSA. MRSA. There's no cure for it, and it preys on the weakest parts of your body. Despite having to have another major back surgery, multiple knee replacements, hip surgery, and now being in a wheelchair, nothing can deter my dad's determination and spirit. He's still determined to walk, and I'm constantly blown away by his positive attitude and his spirit. I tend to run grumpy sometimes, like a lot of times. And then I remind myself that my dad, Arnie, is killing it every day. It hasn't always been easy, but he's always found a way to get through it with perseverance and a smile. I feel like he's even a bit of a local celebrity at times. Despite having limited mobility, he still works at Kohl's, lives independently, was recently in a local commercial, and is known around town as that wacky guy who takes his dog on walks to the dollar store and knows someone who was killed by a giraffe. He's still got the best attitude. He's still out of his mind. He's still my absolute hero in every way. And I'm quite sure he's watching this and crying his eyes out. But man, I wouldn't trade the famous Arnie Gopman for the world.
So that's so beautiful, Lisa. Thank you so much. In the words of wisdom of Melissa McFarland's dad, love is all that matters. And clearly that is the case between Lisa and Arnie. I think we all love Arnie. Yeah, everybody, right? Arnie. So New Orleans native John Crane copes with the current crisis through his faith in God and through his faith in Zoom. If John weren't telling a story in MANECDOTES, he would be fly fishing in Montana, where his daughter would text him, "Happy Father's Day," and his son would completely forget. I imagine a few fathers out there were a bit underwhelmed by the attention sent their way today, but fear not, your influence is lasting. One of our guest producers, Sally Minamitsu, is watching from Baltimore, and she says her father's timeless words of wisdom were wax on, wax off. Perhaps those words would have been a little more helpful to our next storyteller than some of the guidance that John Crane got from his father. Here is John Crane with Things I Didn't Know.
I didn't know my father wore a toupee. The lump of lopsided fur trying to claw its way back onto the top of his head was about as obvious as lipstick on a monkey. But in 1977, when I was 15, I didn't see it. When I looked at my father, which was rare since the divorce 11 years earlier, all I saw was confidence and swagger, topped by a full, healthy head of mismatched dark brown and reddish brown hair. In 1977, I didn't know that in Nicaragua, there were so many dove destroying crops. The rice farmers there encouraged American hunters to come to experience the natural beauty of the Managua countryside. And while you're at it, feel free to exterminate as many crop-killing doves as you can. I didn't know that my father's job of the moment was organizing father-son hunting trips to foreign countries. And when he invited me to join him in Managua for a week that fall, I begged my mother to let me go. I didn't know she was torn because she didn't fully trust my father with my care, and yet she wasn't comfortable denying me a chance to spend time with him. By the time I was 15, I understood that everyone loved my dad. He was handsome, despite the hairpiece. He was lively, funny, loud, and unpredictable. You wanted to be there when he told the next joke or sang the next song. I didn't know why he rarely came to see me. I think I assumed it was because he didn't really know me. And given the chance, I could show him that I was just as funny, lively, and loud as he was. 2 weeks and 3 vaccines later, I was in Central America standing in the middle of a Managuan whorehouse, ready to prove it. The trip to Managua started out about as well as it could go. On the plane ride over, my first, Dad provided multiple opportunities to show him I was game for whatever he had in mind. The first was when he offered to buy me a beer. We both knew that kids weren't supposed to drink beer and dads weren't supposed to offer it to them. But the smile on his face said, "It's okay. Let's break some rules." I'd tasted beer before and thought it was absolutely disgusting, but in that moment, I would have said yes to a gallon of raw sewage if my dad had offered it to me. In fact, I accepted so quickly I thought maybe I'd blown my cover. Thankfully, Dad couldn't resist flirting with the stewardess and didn't register my overenthusiasm. When the beer came, I made sure to take big gulps from it to show him I knew my way around alcohol. I was about 2 swigs in when Dad pulled out a pack of cigarettes and pressed it into my shoulder. "You want to smoke?" he said. Me and my friends had been smoking behind bushes and underneath houses since I was 13, and I was never so happy to be an experienced smoker. "Hell yeah," I said, taking a soft curse word out for a test run. Dad didn't flinch, and by the trip's end, we were both dropping swear words like confetti at a parade. Before my cigarette burned down completely, I strolled down the aisle with my beer and checked in with some of the other boys on the trip. "How's it going?" I said casually, leaning on the seat back, blowing smoke rings and trying to look as cool as a pudgy, short 15-year-old kid could in a Fonzie t-shirt and his mother's bowl cut. No matter. Dad liked that I was social, and by the time we arrived in Managua, I'd made friends with the other boys. At the hotel, Dad spoke Spanish to the valets and bellhops who were happy to see him again. They stooped and nodded as Dad palmed them with $5 bills. He introduced me, and I liked how they bowed and scraped to me too. I was the king's son, which had its perks. The next morning, we took our first hunting trip, and Dad taught me how to shoot dove. You got to lead them a little bit. Aim just ahead of them so the buckshot and the bird meet at the same time. On my third try, buckshot and bird met. "I got him," I shouted. "I got him. Did you see it?" "Yeah, I saw it," Dad said, amused. I had expected him to slap me on the back and tell me what a quick learner I was, but instead he stood there shaking his head. What's going on? I thought. Why wasn't he celebrating my sharp hand-eye coordination? "You killed a parrot," he said finally. "What?" I said. "A parrot? It's illegal to shoot parrots here." He turned to one of the barefoot bird boys whose job it was to retrieve the birds we shot and gave him instructions in Spanish. The boy obediently darted off into the rice field to bury the unlucky parrot in a thicket in order to avoid the $1,000 fine. "I didn't know it was a parrot," I apologized. How can you tell which ones are parrots?" "Parrots are the bright green ones," he said, a slight sarcasm in his tone. "Oh," I muttered, worried that I disappointed him. Then he turned to me with a smile and said, "It's still a good shot, though." And we both shared a good laugh. In the days that followed, we smoked cigarettes, drank beer, killed hundreds of birds, told dirty jokes, and sang John Denver songs together at the hotel bar. By the week's end, I was confident I had made a lasting impression. On our last night in Managua, as we were finishing dinner, one of the dads on the trip turned to my father and said playfully, "Hey, Joe, Show us what's under the rug. I had no idea what he was talking about, and before I knew what was happening, my dad cheerfully lifted his hair off his head as if he were tipping a bowler hat. It could not have been more surprising if he had plucked his eyeball out with a toothpick and dropped it in his martini. The sight of him holding all of his hair over his bald head was a drop your fork kind of moment, and I was paralyzed by it. It changed the look of his entire face. The crown of his head was slightly misshapen. The appearance of his forehead moved his eyes below where they once were. Patchy strands of hair shivered in the updraft of the toupee, begging it to come back down where it belonged. The twisted grin on his face made him look menacing. It lasted only a moment, but for that moment, I lost him. I didn't recognize him. The swagger and charisma I always saw in him had vanished before my eyes. I couldn't find the man that I spent the entire week with and was having dinner with only moments before. He was a stranger, and while I couldn't fully articulate it then, it triggered a voice deep inside of me that whispered something like, "You are not safe." He dropped the toupee back into place with a ta-da, and just like that, he had returned. Everyone at the table clapped their hands with laughter, and we resumed our desserts as if nothing happened. I was still reeling from it all when Dad called me over. "Some of the boys are going to a whorehouse tonight," he said suggestively. "I'm buying. What do you say?" At first, I wasn't sure he said what he said, but the dryness in my mouth was proof I'd heard correctly. He had phrased it like a question, but it wasn't a question. It wasn't even an offer. It was a test. A final test to prove myself worthy of him, to show him I could be the son he wanted. And it was in that moment that I realized as much as I didn't know about my father, there was as much that he didn't know about me. He didn't know that I was shy around girls and that I had only recently had one awkward kiss with Marianne LaRue on the diving board of her swimming pool. He didn't know that I still liked cartoons and memorized Flip Wilson comedy albums. In 1977, I didn't fantasize about having sex with Farrah Fawcett. I fantasized about going steady with Christy McNichol. He didn't know that even if I wasn't influenced by my Catholic upbringing, sex with a complete stranger in a foreign land was repulsive and terrifying. "Okay, yeah, I'll go," I said with as much enthusiasm as I could fake. Less than 30 minutes later, I and a handful of other teenage boys arrived at what looked like a horse barn in an area so remote and dark you couldn't tell the color of the building if you were standing 6 inches away from it. As we stepped quietly from the van and approached the door, I wished I hadn't come on the trip at all. I wished I'd never learned that my dad wore a toupee, or how to shoot a gun, or that parrots are bright green. We were two complete strangers pretending to be father and son. I didn't want any part of it, but refusing him would mean losing him. One by one, we stepped inside. Thank you.
Wow, that's a powerful story. I think everybody can agree with that. I got some words of wisdom from Tom Lusby's dad, and he says, when you get tired, keep walking, take shorter steps, but keep walking. And I don't know, maybe that wasn't the best place to walk, but you turned out okay, John Crane. Now, our next storyteller, it's his third time in one of my shows, and Ty Fance and I have shared a lot of other stages over the years around Southern California. Ty says that his coping mechanism during COVID has been to complain a lot. And then after his tantrums, he grabs his tool belt, he loads it with tools, and then he picks up his lovely wife Delia's 10 years of honey-do lists, and he gets to work. Now, I was surprised to see this next comment from one of our ticket purchasers, because she probably could have scored herself a free ticket. So I thank her for the support. Maddie Weerts from San Diego shared, when I was a little girl, my dad would set a cup of water on the edge of the kitchen counter before tucking me into bed. He would tell me that he left some water just in case. It was a small gesture, but each night it gave me a sense of comfort as I slept. My dad has always been a comforting presence for me. Nice, Maddie. So my friend Ty had a more circuitous route to getting to know his father, but it was powerful nonetheless. Everybody, here's Ty Fance.
Hi, my dad, a 5'8", 185-pound, slender, muscular man, wore black framed glasses with thick lenses. As a kid, I would take those glasses on hot sunny days and go outside and burn pieces of paper and ants. He smoked Pall Mall cigarettes. He always had one in the corner of his mouth when he talked to you. And when he worked on his car to change the oil or tried to fix that leaky drain underneath the kitchen sink, he would push his sleeves back above his elbow. The might of his arms and his hands on full display. When I was younger, when I was 12, he drove a cab. He worked second shift, sometimes third shift. And as a result of that, whenever we spent any time together, it was mostly me talking to him while he was asleep on the couch. We'd be sharing my day. And next to the couch on the floor would be 2 to 3 empty cans of Budweiser. Dad, wow. Practice today at football? Wow, it was great. You remember Dexter, right? Well, Dexter is the guy, he's a kid, but he looks like a man because he's got muscles on top of muscles. And he's 13 because his birth certificate says it, and he's our running back. Now I was playing linebacker, and he was running, and he didn't see me because he had the ball, and I was going to tackle him. But when I got really close, he looked at me and put his head down, and it scared me. So I put my head down too, and I closed my eyes, and boom, my helmet flew off. But before he could get away, I reached out and I put my arms around one of his gigantic thighs, and I just held on really tight, and he just kept running, dragging me with him. And so I was holding on, I was about to lose my grip, and just at that moment, he tripped and fell. Dad, did you hear what? I tackled Dexter today, all by myself. I wish you were there. So fast forward 30 years, I'm living in Los Angeles. And I find myself wanting to write something more reflective of my dad's life. And I sat down for 3 or 4 days and I couldn't come up with a thing because he never shared anything about his life. He never talked about being a kid or being a teenager or growing up in Willis, Texas. He never shared his emotions or his feelings. So I decided I'm just gonna fly back to Texas and find out what I can. So I fly back, I land, and I drive over to my favorite uncle's house, Uncle Scrappy. He's the youngest brother of my dad. Now the thing about Uncle Scrappy, I haven't seen him in 30 years. He's about 6'2" at this time, 280 pounds. And he's wearing brown frame glasses with lenses as thick as the ones my dad had. But his make his eyes look so big that he always looks surprised. So, and then one thing about him, he always sounds like he's having a good time when he talks. So he's like, hey boy, get on in here, California. Boy, look at you. I haven't seen you in so long. The last time I saw you, you was like 15, you had an 18-inch afro. Now look at you now, boy. You don't filled out, you're strong, you look like your dad. So you want to know something about your father. Well, you know he didn't talk much. Oh, you knew that. Well, did you know he was a Chicago Golden Glove boxer? Oh yeah, and he was good. 30 fights, 28 knockouts. He was just knocking them out, boom, boom, boom. And you know what? He hated bullies. Oh, he couldn't stand them. Anybody came to us and disrespected us and said something stupid, he just whoop on them, man. I remember this one time, we was over there on that cafe on Benton, right next to Jensen. And we was like in our 30s, right? And we was having beers and playing cards, you know how we do. And this guy said something stupid about your dad's glasses. Well, you shouldn't have done that. Because your dad stood up and pop, flipped him right over that pool table. It was beautiful. You should have seen it. Your dad or something else. Oh, well, by the way, that's where he met your mother, at that same cafe. Oh, yeah, she wouldn't have nothing to do with it, but he just hang out there day and night, day and night. Dude, man, he would do anything for her. Oh, yeah, he even married her, even though your papa fans didn't want him to marry her. You know, your grandfather wouldn't have nothing to do with that, but he married her anyway. Told him, I marry whoever the hell I want to, and you can't do a damn thing about it. That's the way he was, boy. So you want to know why he drank? Well, nephew, we all drank. Your aunt, your mama, you know, social. That's why we was doing it. But it didn't get that bad, though, until your mom left him and moved to California with your kids. That's when it got bad. I hated to see that. I hope you visit him today. You'd like that. All right now, boy, when you leave, I'm telling you what, next time you come down, you be sure and call me early because I want to take you to Sibian Beach. I'm going to show you how to fish. You can catch some sheephead, some croakers, them sea bass. That sea bass is good eating. You know that, right? That's right. You be sure and call me. Don't just show up. All right, boy, you take it easy. See you, nephew. So I'm standing in front of my dad's headstone. And it reads, Stephen Vance, July 28, 1928, January 4th, 1994. But what catches my eye is the next line, Private, United States Army, Korea. And suddenly my eyes, I just can't even begin to describe it. It started out slow, but the flow of tears, just, my shirt was just soaked. And I didn't even try to stop it. I just let it happen. And I remember having a conversation with him. I was like, Dad, I didn't know you were in Korea. You never. So many questions. What was it like for you to grow up in the 30s and 40s and 50s up in Weerts? What was that like? Were you a good student? Did you like school? What was your first job? What was your first car? What made you laugh? What made you cry? What scared you? Uncle tells me, you boxed. I would have loved that. I boxed 2 years myself. Would love to talk to you about that. You also told me you met Mom at the cafe y'all hung out at. Told me you used to hang out there morning, noon, and night, even though she wouldn't give you the time of day. I'm here to tell you, right now they call that stalking. You also told me you married her, even though Grandpa Vance didn't want you to marry her. You just kind of do what you want to do. Good for you, Dad. Good for you. Turns out we have a lot more in common than I knew. Here I am again, talking to you while you're asleep.
Oh, thank you, Ty. Thank you so much. I think you turned out pretty darned well after your circuitous route to get to know that dad of yours. Lynn Jones of Holly Springs, North Carolina, said that her dad's favorite line to her is, all things considered, you turned out okay. I'd say that that's quite true about you too, my friend Ty. So our next storyteller was born at Doctors Hospital in Manhattan in the Lucille Ball Suite and grew up in South Jersey amidst diners, malls, and guys named Vinny with blow-dried chest hairs. Cherry Hill, New Jersey, to be exact. There were no cherries, no hills, just a whole lot of Jersey. She's been coping with the pandemic by binge watching Dead to Me and the Gilmore Girls and making out with her husband. She Yeah, this year I didn't get around to getting my dad a card. Sorry, Dad. But this show is much better than a card, right? But if I did get him something, it would probably be corny because he is the king of puns and non sequiturs. However, mushy cards work too because he's gotten really sentimental as the years have gone by. Unfortunately, Wendy Hammer's choices were a bit more limited. Here is Wendy Hammers with Hallmark Has No Words.
Thanks, Suzanne. Oh, okay, here we go. Every year, around the first week of June, I find myself wandering through the aisles of greeting card stores, the racks at CVS and Target, even the fancy car wash on Sepulveda, all in hopes of finding the perfect Father's Day card, one that will accurately express my feelings for my dad. And there is the problem. Most of the feelings I have for my dad wouldn't be caught dead in the card. I mean, is anyone selling the "I really wish you had been more emotionally available" card? Or the one that reads, "Here's to my dad, a wounded, depressed narcissist"? I'd buy those in bulk. Instead, I'm left poring over gorgeous artisan crafted cards with sentiments like, "Thank you for being there with me every day with love and guidance, all the love and guidance I ever needed." Or "Everything you've taught me has stuck with me, and I'm lucky to have a dad like you." Now, these cards would be perfect if I had had a completely different dad. I don't relate to these cards at all. If I sent them, I'd be a liar, and my dad didn't raise no liar. So I'd leave the store empty-handed and heavy-hearted. To tell you the truth, Happy Father's Day cards made me sad. I longed for a dad worthy of Hallmark. I remember one year I brought several cards in hopes of, somehow my dad and I would suddenly have an actual relationship by the time I got home. But hell didn't freeze over, and my dad remained the same distant, negative guy he'd always been. And Father's Days would come and go, and the cards would linger in my desk drawer, piling up. Maybe I'll feel something next year, and I'll send it then, I'd tell myself. Now, to be clear, my dad didn't beat me or molest me or cheat on my mom or rob banks. He never killed anyone. He didn't do a million horrible things that some dads do. He wasn't Bernie Madoff or a crooked politician. He just wasn't a happy guy. He wasn't particularly kind or demonstrative or medicated. He was broken and empty, so much so that he began to see that as normal. He didn't go to therapy or read or enjoy music. He had virtually no relationship with me and a horrendous and volatile one with my only brother. Now, I can count how many times he said "I love you" to me on one hand and still have a few fingers left over. He just didn't have a lot of joy to give. He did have one light in his life, my mother. He worshiped the ground she walked on until her teacup fell on the floor on an early Monday, January morning, and so did she. She never walked again, and our whole family was paralyzed. I would say my dad started dying the day my mom had her stroke. He became inconsolable and talked of suicide often. The man who I usually heard from 3 times a year was now calling me to cry and complain 3 times a day. And then, this past October, he passed. Like the Staples store up the block that went out of business last year, he closed the shop that was his life. He was looking for an exit strategy, and after 3 years of saying he wasn't long for this world, he manifested stage 4 pancreatic cancer and was gone within 2 weeks. So, what did I learn from him? How to do my multiplication tables really well. He took me to the racetrack and he showed me how to handicap the ponies. He taught me that it was good to have an opinion, to be passionate, to care about politics. What did I inherit from him? My love of food, my Julo butt, those 2 things are probably related, my good hair. What was his legacy? What was his legacy? What he wasn't, what he didn't have: warmth, a positive outlook, patience. I'm sure I spent my lifetime working to cultivate those qualities and make sure I didn't become like him. I couldn't say it then. Neither could he. I'm saying it now. And since I never did find a card with the right words, I've decided to write my own. Dear Dad, you were a miserable son of a bitch, a complaining know-it-all that alienated people on a regular basis. I wish you had been a very different kind of man. I am so sorry that we missed each other in this lifetime. I am so sorry you didn't know me, your daughter. I'm kind of cool. I suspect and hope that deep down, you were too. Oh, and I love you, Dad. Happy Father's Day. Love, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy. You know, I think sometimes we have to find our family outside of our family, and I think many of us have done that in many cases. Shar Tabbitt's dad told her, "The only person you can trust truly is yourself." Now, and sometimes I think maybe that's true. Richard Grimes of Arlington Heights, Illinois, who's watching, he says his dad always told him to keep your eye on the ball, both literally and figuratively. And unfortunately, with everything that's going on right now, keeping your eye on the ball at the baseball field is not possible. Used to be, you could always count on baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, America's pastime in the summer. But since we can't go to any games yet, Dan Freedman, the biggest baseball fan that I know, is going to take you out to the ball game with his heartfelt tribute to generations.
It was the spring of 2009. My wife had recently died, and I wanted to do something special for my son. He was only 6 when she passed, and our relationship meant all that much more to me as he, without knowing it, became my rock in those cold, dark days. But with both the gloom of winter and the grief starting to recede, I looked forward to longer, more joyful days ahead. My son was, even at that young age and still today, a massive baseball fan. As a doting father, I introduced him to the Boston Red Sox early on. He quickly became well-versed in the lore, the curse, the reverse, and as of 2009, 2 championships in 4 years when there had been none in the previous 86. I decided to plan a summer trip to Boston, a walk along the Freedom Trail, a visit to the Old North Church, shopping at Faneuil Hall and pizza in the North End, and of course, his first visit to Fenway Park. This was going to be a father-son trip that neither of us would ever forget. I casually mentioned my plans to my father, born and bred in Dorchester, a man who still, throughout his 60s and well into his 70s, heads back to Boston at least once or twice every year or two to visit family and friends, a man who, having lived in Los Angeles for 56 of the last 62 years, still loses an occasional R when he's speaking too quickly or after too many cocktails. A man who proudly hangs a Ted Williams jersey in his dining room and brazenly wears his B hat into Dodger and Angel stadiums. In short, my father is a man who loves himself some Beantown. Well, moments after we spoke, my dad booked himself a flight, a rental car, and a hotel. And then he told me he was joining our trip. Truth be told, I was a bit miffed. This was going to be something special between me and my boy, a little father-son bonding time on the East Coast. And now it was not that. Now it was something different. Now it wasn't what I had envisioned. But it didn't take long for that irritation to subside and for me to see what this had now become. In its most simple form, a 3-generation trip. In Hebrew, there's an expression, lador vidor, from generation to generation. This was that personified. Summer came, and so did the trip. Despite a nasty migraine on the flight to Boston, I rallied and allowed my dad to drive us 45 minutes into the suburbs to his favorite Chinese restaurant. Calling it mediocre would be kind, but my dad insisted that the food was much better back in the day. Well, there was no chance that I was going to allow one headache and one bad meal to ruin this trip. The next day was straight out of photos. We covered all the tourist attractions. It's possible that I followed this path when I was my son's age, but I have no recollection. So it turned out to be as much about my education as about his. And credit where credit is due. My dad really knows the city. He knows how and where to drive. No easy feat with one-way streets and turnabouts at every intersection. He knows how and where to park, which can be really tricky with the narrow cobblestone and the usurious parking lots. And he knows where to dine, save for one bad Chinese restaurant, although that's considerably easier insofar as you can't throw a rock in Boston and not find something delicious to eat. What originally seemed like my dad horning in on our vacation turned into him making it so much better. With Grandpa in charge, we took a trip down his memory lane. We went to his old neighborhood, into the vacant lot where his childhood home once stood. We strolled the halls of his middle school and drove to the temple where he became a bar mitzvah. My mom grew up in Boston as well, so he took us to her building, and we talked our way into a tour of her exact apartment, just 2 floors up. We got sodas at my father's haunt, Simcoe's on Blue Hill Avenue. We walked along the lonely roads of Southie where my father found trouble and where trouble found him so many years ago. Suffice it to say, I never could have done this alone. I never could have shown my son his grandparents' childhood without my father leading the way. I never could have added the color or the context of the meaning of his heritage without my dad. Saving his best for last, my dad had made arrangements with the Red Sox for us to have an exclusive tour of Fenway Park. The tour turned out not to be so exclusive, but it was one of the greatest afternoons any of us will ever have. As our guide led us down the grandstand to step onto the field of that beloved ballpark, I yelled out, "I'm not sure who's more excited." My father quickly responded, "I do. I am. I'm excited for my grandson, my son, and for me." He was right. He won. 3 generations. L'adore Vidor indeed. While we were in Boston, as fate would have it, Ted Kennedy passed away. Our hotel was just down the street from the JFK library, so we stood on line to pay our respects while Senator Kennedy lay in repose. This was the perfect historical bookend to our trip, and yet another opportunity to educate and bond with my father, who had voted for Jack in 1960, and with my son, who was just old enough to conceptually understand the import of the Lion of the Senate. As I begin to mentally and emotionally prepare for my son to leave home next year, to start his journey as a college student, I often think back to that trip. For a few days, it seemed, my father reclaimed the reins he had let go on me so many years before. I wonder if and when I will do the same with my son. And if so, will it have the same resonance? This much I do know, not for the world would I trade those 4 days in Boston with my father and my son. Those experiences, those memories, they're with me forever. They'll last 3 lifetimes. They will last for generations. Thank you.
Sorry, guys. So thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate you. Stephen Bola's dad told him that to pursue whatever brings you the greatest joy. If you can make a living at it, then it's icing on the cake. And Tim Murphy, who's on the city council for Burbank, he said similar words of wisdom from his dad. And he also said, his dad also said, treat people as you want to be treated. And he always reminded him that community service is expected. It should be just like breathing. And I think Tim took his dad's words to heart, and as did many other people who are watching this show. We have our last storyteller coming up now. He grew up in a farm in central Illinois, and he recently launched a fantastically funny podcast, So Says Rick. The link will be in our chat, and like all of the info on tonight's storytellers, their bios are also on our Jam Creative website if you want to learn a little bit more about them. While you've been binge watching old shows, you may have seen Rick. He has cameos in Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, JAG, Key and Peele, and NCIS. And like Ty Fance, Rick has been getting by the past few months by making repairs around his house and making a lot of mistakes, which I'm sure will show up in some of the stories on his podcast soon. Here to share the story of a repair he made back when his daughter was young. This is Rick Hall with Water on the Dance Floor.
I have two daughters who are in their 20s, and being a dad is something that takes years and years for you to actually get any good at it. And just when you get good at it, things change. It's really hard. But nobody can prepare you for the change that will happen when your girls turn teenagers. Your sweet, loving, compassionate, cuddly girls, suddenly a switch goes off in their head and they become feral animals who live in your house, eat your food, and make you sleep with one eye open. Yeah, everything I said was embarrassing. Everything I did was stupid. So imagine the horror of my daughter Ruthie when I told her that I had volunteered to do some handyman work at the dance studio at her middle school. The night before I was supposed to go to the school, she sat me down and gave me 3 rules. Dad, number 1, don't talk to any kids. Number 2, don't sing or whistle while you work or walk across campus. And number 3, don't take off your shirt. I said, honey, why would I take off my shirt? Just promise me, Dad. Okay. Next morning, I got to the dance studio, had my tool bag in my hands, and I went into the dance studio. Now, when you walk in, there's a carpeted area in the front of it where the teacher's desk is, and then past that is this beautiful wooden dance floor. And Miss Daniels, the teacher, was so proud of the dance floor because it took years of wrangling with the school board and fundraising and bake sales, and we all had to sell that crappy wrapping paper that you sell to all your relatives and apologize for doing. So, but anyway, finally they had their dance floor, and she was so proud of it. And the next phase in the renovation process was to do demolition on both the girls' and the boys' dressing room. She took me to the girls' dressing room. She said, tear out everything. And you see that pipe sticking out of the wall? There was a water pipe about shoulder height that was sticking out, about a foot or so, and it had a cap on the end of it. She said, can you take that out? I said, well, it looks like a water line. You sure it's not an active water line? She said, oh no, that hasn't had water in it for years. Okay, the place is yours. I have to go teach in a couple other classrooms until 6th period, so have fun. Okay, I got out my pipe wrench and put it on the cap on that water line. I figured I'll start with the hard stuff, and I broke that cap loose, and I started to turn it, and I had it almost all the way off, and then I stopped because I saw just a little drop of water at the bottom of those threads, and I thought, maybe she's wrong. Maybe there is water in this line. And then I realized, no, I know what it is. I know it is. There's residual water left in the line from when they shut it off. So I went and got a trash can, put it underneath it, and I thought, I'll catch those drips of rusty water when they come out. I grabbed the cap and I turned it, those last few little threads, and there was so much water pressure in that line that it blew the cap out of my hand. Never saw it again. It landed across the room somewhere. The water was shooting out 3 feet or so before it even started to drop off. My first reaction was, I'll put my thumb over the hole. There was so much water pressure, I couldn't even get my thumb on the hole in seconds. I'm soaked with water. So I know we have to turn off the main to this room, okay? So I run out to the carpeted area because there's a phone there, which, by the way, meant that I was soaking wet and ran across the wooden dance floor. Not good. I called the maintenance guy and I said, we got a broken pipe in their dance studio. We got to turn off the main to this room. Then I ran back in and I looked for something to try and plug the hole with. Down on the floor, well, actually floating in the water by now, was a broom. The handle looked like it was about the right size. I jammed it into the pipe. It did not stop the water. No, it just made it into a jet of water, but I leaned into it as hard as I could. I thought maybe I'm slowing the water down a little bit, but that jet of water was hitting me in the face with the power of like a power washer, one of those things that takes paint off of stucco. And finally, the pressure subsided and I dropped the broom. And by the way, the last few drops, they went in the wastebasket. And I looked down and I thought, wow, water's only about ankle deep. I figured it'd be worse than this. And I realized what had happened. I turned around, there was a river of water going out the door of the dance, underneath the floor of the dance studio. This wooden dance floor was going to get warped in no time. I had an image of Miss Daniel showing up the next morning, and the whole floor would look like a big Pringles potato chip warped in the middle of the room. And then for years, parents would say, who was it that ruined our good dance floor before we even got to use it? And they would say, oh, it was Ruthie Hall's daddy. I heard the door of the dance studio open up, and the handyman or the maintenance man came in, and I met him there, and he looked, and he had the perfect right words to say. He said, oh, geez, this is bad. This is really bad. I said, do you have a shop vac, a wet dry thing that I can start sucking up water, anything? He said, yeah, you know, this is bad. I realized that. He left. I'm soaking wet, so I took off my shirt to wring it out, you know, just to get the water out of it. You know what happened. The 6th period bell rang. The kids started coming in, and I swear to you, the first child through that door was my daughter, Ruthie. And she looked horrified, like she'd walked into an NCIS crime scene or something. And there I stood, water everywhere. I'm soaking wet, no shirt on. And I mouthed the words, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And she pushed the kids out behind her. And I heard a little girl say, who's that hairy, wet man? And as the door closed, my daughter, Ruthie, said, I have no idea. Well, the maintenance guy got there, and he got a shop vac for me. And I got lucky because this wooden dance floor was actually what they call a floating dance floor. But it was that day, at least. But it meant it wasn't sitting right on the concrete. And the concrete sloped towards the carpeted area. I was able to stand there with that shop vac and just keep sucking up water as it came to me. I was there for hours. Finally, 8:30 at night, the water stopped coming out from under the floor. I went home. It was quiet at our house. I said to my wife, Laura, should I go talk to Ruthie? She said, please don't. The next day, Ruthie went to school, and she came home, and she didn't seem upset at all. So I said, how was dance class? And she said, fine. Why? I go, no, just asking. And the next day, same thing. I never asked. I never thought I should pick at that scab and find out what happened until about a year ago. I called my daughter, and I was on the phone with her, and all of a sudden I said, hey, by the way, do you remember that time I flooded the dance studio at your middle school? And she said, yeah, that's kind of hard to forget. I said, but Ruthie, you didn't seem very upset at me. I don't understand. And she goes, oh, I guess I never told you. Well, Miss Daniels was kind of mean to me all the time, and I was getting a C in dance class, barely getting a C. And she thought that broken pipe was her fault and that you had saved the day. So after that, she treated me really nice, and I ended up getting an A in dance class. Oh, my friends. As a father, sometimes you're stupid, sometimes you're embarrassing, but every now and then, just every once in a while, you get to be the hero.
Thank you, Rick. That was a wonderful way to conclude our show. And I thought I'd let everybody know as well that while we were online, some people bought a few more tickets. So we've already raised $4,875 for FSA, which makes me so excited. And if anybody is inspired to want to try to help a little bit more, you totally can. I just I've just put the information on where you can send checks if you're inspired to do so. I know that they would appreciate it, and there is a lot of work to be done right now. But thanks so much, Rick, the Hans Brinker of North Hollywood. We appreciate your story. And thanks to all of the cast. You will soon see their photos, many with their dads in the credits. Thank you for our sponsors. Thanks to everyone across the country who joined us to celebrate this Father's Day in a special way. The music that you're about to hear in the credits is by 2020 John Burroughs High School graduate Nick Scrabak. And I just wanted to share that in the immortal wisdom of FSA board member Joel Shapiro's dad, be happy, and take care of the people that you love. Have a good night.
Oh, how the time flies. Don't close your eyes. And when the night dies, the sun won't rise. I don't wanna be there when the eyes run dry. Oh, how the time flies. I've seen your smile. Looks a bit like mine. All I want now is to know you're alright. Forever bloodstained, blue jeans, you're here. Backwards and so thin.